To do this, Loki fake cuts off Thor's hand and delivers Jane to Malekith. And then the cursed Dark Elf is like, yo, dude, Malekith, this guy's like totally not into Asgard. He told me to go left, and I went left, and it worked out. He's cool. So Malekith's like, Coolsville, daddy-o.
He's paraphrasing.
Welcome back to another episode of The Rank. I'm John, and today we're going to be continuing to rank action movies. For those of you that are new to the show, I'm going to give you a brief agenda here. We start off with the potent notables, which are just a couple interesting facts or tidbits that I found out about the movie. Then I go into the movie overview, which is me talking about everything that happened in the movie, so spoiler alert. And then I do the rank, where I rank the movie in 10 categories on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best, all to find out what are the best action movies of all time. And today we're going to be ranking Thor: The Dark World, the 2013 MCU action movie starring Chris Hemsworth, Natalie Portman, Anthony Hopkins, and Tom Hiddleston. Based on the comics by Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, and Jack Kirby, a story by Don Payne and Robert Rodat, with a screenplay written by Christopher L. Yost, Christopher Marcus, and Stephen McFeely, and directed by Alan Taylor. Now, this has historically been considered one of the weakest MCU films, but how will it rank with my rankings and against the other MCU movies I've already ranked? Let's find out, starting with the potent notables.
Potent notables.
So as always, we start the potent notables with the movie's box office. Thor: The Dark World made $206.4 million domestically and $438.4 million internationally for a worldwide total of $644.8 million. And this was against a budget of $170 million. So even though it wasn't as well received at the time, it was still a gigantic hit. And interestingly, it was the final film of screenwriter Don Payne, who died 8 months before its release. And this was actually his third Marvel film that he wrote, after Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer in 2007 and Thor from 2011. Now, the idea for this movie was for it to be a darker, more grounded version than the first one was. But Alan wasn't even actually the first choice. Patty Jenkins was the first choice. And she ended up leaving, citing creative differences. Specifically, she said she didn't think she could make a good movie out of the script that they had. And Taylor even admitted that if they had brought in somebody who was more of a writer-director as opposed to his skills, which is more director-producer, it might have turned out better. You see, the original shoot lasted from September to December of 2012, and by all accounts, it went pretty well. But then when we got to post-production, things went sideways. That's when the studio stepped in and demanded reshoots. They wanted it to tie in more with the Avengers story. They started adding scenes that weren't in it before and making sure that there was more Loki, who did actually die in it, but then the studio didn't want him to. Eventually, Christopher Eccleston, who played Malekith, likened the experience to putting a gun in his mouth. He had to spend 7 hours a day doing makeup, so that could make someone cranky, I guess. But it wasn't just him. Idris Elba also said that he didn't enjoy working on this movie because of the constant reshoots, which were exhausting and time-consuming. He even referred to working on this movie as torture. And Alan Taylor ended up calling it wrenching, because he was given absolute freedom while it was shooting, but then in post, it became a whole different movie. He said the version he started off with had more childlike wonder. There were major plot differences that were inverted in the cutting room. Quote, people who died were not dead. People who had broken up were back together again. And he finished it off by saying, I think I would like my version. So I guess all that to say, let's see the Taylor cut, right? I want to see the Taylor cut. But those are the potent notables. Let's go to the movie overview. So we open the movie with Odin giving us a voiceover of lore. Before there was light, there was dark. And there were beings that existed in this darkness. I think at this point there were a lot of people that were like, what the hell is this movie talking about? Before there was light and matter, there were beings without matter. But here's what you're going to discover with this ranking. I liked this. I get that it's counterintuitive, but I like the idea that there was something that existed before our universe was born. So already I'm probably more on board for this than most people are. Then we get a whole bunch of CGI-based exposition about how obsessed the Dark Elves were with turning off the light switch. They're going to use the Aether, this otherworldly substance, to erase light from the universe so that they can live more comfortably, I guess? Unless I missed something, I don't remember them saying anything about how they couldn't live in a universe that had light, just basically that they don't like it. Also, I feel like there's plenty of darkness in space, Dark Elves. Like, I feel like you could find somewhere to live where it's dark. Anyway, they want to destroy the light. King Bor, who is Thor's grandfather, for some reason, understands that the Aether is too powerful to destroy, but decides not to pass that knowledge down through the ages, or really in an Asgardian's case, to his son. Also, it seems like this battle between the Dark Elves and Asgard took place before there was life on Earth or something, or much life in the Nine Realms. I'm not really sure when this takes place. But one thing is for sure, Asgardian technology has not really advanced. They had the Bifrost then, they have it now, and they still, have spears and horses and shit. And we establish in this that Asgardians live like 5,000 years because of Loki's flippant response about how humans are immortal, and they are too, give or take 5,000 years. So let's just say that Odin is about 5,000 years old, right? And let's say for the sake of argument, the Bor is like 100, just a baby. So that means that this battle took place about 10,000 years ago. And just then the Dark Elves are finally like, you know what, enough with the light. It's been like 14 billion years. I've had enough. But that's not really the point. The point is that Bor won the war. The Dark Elves destroyed as many Asgardians as possible, kamikaze style. And Malekith, their leader, escaped with some other Dark Elves on his ship. And it seems like they could have just retreated, but whatever. Then we have Loki's exposition, which is basically just that he got sent to jail instead of being sentenced to death because Frigga, his mom, and the Queen of Asgard didn't want him to die. So he's in a jail cell with some kind of yellow digital windows that you can't escape from. Don't worry, he's gonna come into play later. So the opening exposition is a little weak, but it's laying the groundwork for what's to come. As we head to the present and watch Thor battle some realms that were in upheaval after the Bifrost was broken. He hammers a rock guy into pebbles, then it's determined that all 9 realms are now pacified and peace at last. All hail Thor. But victory doesn't taste as sweet to poor Thor because he's pining for Jane Foster back on Earth. And everyone thinks it's a great folly for him to be in love with an Earthling because her life is going to be a blink of an eye compared to Thor's. But I would think that would be all the more reason to support it. Like, what's 50 years to them? Also, he's just going to keep looking like him, and Jane's going to get super old. I would think that relationship would sort of naturally run its course over time. And then Lady Sif could come in and pick up the pieces. But after we find out what's happening on Asgard, we get to go to Earth and find out what's happening there. And what's happening? Well, Jane Foster's on a date with the IT crowd. So things are looking up. We also learn that nobody can get a hold of Eric Selvig for reasons we'll find out soon enough. And actually, for whatever reason, we as the audience get to find out why they can't reach Eric Selvig before the characters do, and I don't know why. So I guess might as well just tell you what's going on, right? Well, he's lost his mind a little bit. He decided to show his ding-dong to tourists in Stonehenge, which, not the best. Darcy's back as well as she comes in to break up the date that Jane's having with Chris O'Dowd. Why? Because they found some gravitational anomalies. And by anomalies, we mean that certain places in England have entered the video game portal, except you don't need a portal gun. This is all happening due to the convergence. All the 9 realms line up, and apparently it makes it so that reality gets distorted. But Jane is going to accidentally slip through one of these portals and end up face to face with the Aether. Now, lucky for Jane, Thor just happened to be asking Heimdall to look in on her and see what she's up to during the 5 hours that she's away making out with the Aether. So Heimdall isn't able to see her, so that sets Thor into worrying. And he decides he's going to go visit her. And when he does, he's greeted by a slap in the face. 2, actually. Like, I get that you're upset, but damn. Imagine it was the other way around. You can't just attack people. Anyway, she gets over it pretty quickly because, he's Thor and all. But little do they know that the Aether's reappearance has awoken Malekith and his Dark Elf minions. He somehow senses that both the convergence is upcoming and that the Aether is back in play. He's going to chase down young Jane, who is not being treated super nice in her first trip to Asgard, at least by Odin. Now, one thing that I felt like this movie did well was moments of levity. Like when Jane is in Asgard and Odin's like, I know who you are. And she gets all demure and goes, oh, you talked to your dad about me? I mean, that was cute. And there's other moments too, like Loki becoming Captain America and feeling the righteousness surge through him. Anyway, they put a lot of these cute lines in here. Now, while Odin isn't super nice to Jane, Frigga is. She's just a freaking nice lady, I guess.
Oh, brother.
Yeah, where was I? But she's not allowed to get too comfortable because the Dark Elves have initiated their attack. They come right into Asgard with their invisible ships. Though at least one doesn't make it because Heimdall's a badass. He runs up the side of a bridge at apparently the same speed as a spaceship and dives onto it and just blows it up. It sort of makes me want the Heimdall solo movie, Even though I know Idris Elba would never want to do that. Frigga ends up sacrificing her life to save Jane, though she might not have had to if Loki hadn't sent the cursed Dark Elf up the left staircase. And just to touch on the cursed thing, which is capital K-U-R-S-E-D. Apparently they have these like ether-infused balls or whatever that if they shove into themselves, makes them turn into a giant rage monster like a Hulk. Also, let's talk about one of their weapons, because I really liked it. It's essentially like a black hole creation grenade. They toss it and it just sucks people into it, and then it collapses and they're gone. I thought that was a pretty cool weapon. Anyway, Frigga saves Jane by dying, and Thor's like, no! And then Odin wants revenge, and then Loki destroys his cell. So everyone's sad for poor Frigga. But it sure seems that Thor is the only one who's able to keep his head here. You see, Odin wants to fight the Dark Elves, but Thor wants to save as many Asgardians as he can by luring the Dark Elves away from Asgard. Odin's like, bring them back, let's beat them up. And here's my question with this. It sure seems like just Malekith and his minions just can't be stopped by Asgard. But didn't Asgard beat the Dark Elves before? And I mean, they beat them when the Dark Elves had like a much bigger population and larger army, right? So doesn't it stand to reason that they could beat them again? Anyway, Thor's plan is to get Jane out of Asgard and use her as bait to lure Malekith. Have Malekith extract the Aether from Jane, which would save her life, and then destroy the Aether and beat up Malekith. To do this, though, he needs Loki's help to get out of Asgard because he doesn't know any other way than the Bifrost, and his daddy won't let him leave. But you see, Loki does know other ways out of Asgard. So in this plan, Sif has to break Jane out of jail because it's just too well guarded for Thor to do it. But when Sif does it, it's just like she just bonks two guards' heads together and that's it. So not really a crack team. Volstagg has to help Thor, Loki, and Jane hijack the Dark Elf ship that sort of crashed in their building. Then Fandral has to help them by having a getaway car ready so that when Thor decides to ditch the decoy Dark Elf ship, they have somewhere else to land. But that's just the first part of the convoluted plan. The next is to fool the audience into thinking that Loki doesn't give a shit about Frigga. To do this, Loki fake cuts off Thor's hand and delivers Jane to Malekith. And then the cursed Dark Elf is like, yo, dude, Malekith, this guy's like totally not into Asgard. He told me to go left, and I went left, and it worked out. He's cool. So Malekith's like, Coolsville, daddy-o.
He's paraphrasing.
I'm just gonna take this Aether out of Jane Foster now. But wait, Thor really does have two hands. And he does his lightning attack and blows up the Aether. The plan worked to perfection, except wait, the Aether just recombines, and Malekith makes like Daniel Day-Lewis and drinks it up like a milkshake.
You can't keep getting away with it!
What will they do now? Will they just sort of watch the Aether reformulate and then do nothing as Malekith is drinking it up? But then Loki's gonna beat up some Dark Elves and Thor's gonna fight the cursed guy, but nothing can stop the cursed guy. So I guess Thor's just going to die now. But Loki comes to the rescue. He stabs the cursed guy like through his entire body with a spear of some sort. And we're like, all right, they win. But then we're reminded, cursed guy can't be killed like this. So he just turns and kills Loki. But Loki, that trickster, he actually put one of those black hole grenades into the cursed guy's body, and then kaboom, he's gone. But Loki's dead now, so Thor and Jane have to figure out how they're gonna get out of this. How are they gonna get off this world? Well, Jane's gonna get a phone call from IT. Wouldn't you know it? They just happen to be near the portal anomaly from Earth. So they can just go into a cave and end up on Earth. What luck! When Jane gets back with Thor, Darcy and her intern Ian have sprung Selvig from the mental institution, and he's got some gravity spears that he says can stabilize gravity during the convergence. But they decide to use them as teleportation devices instead. You see, the center of the convergence is in Greenwich, England, because of course it is. So they know Malekith is coming there to use the Aether. So they set up their teleportation yard decor and use it to their advantage so that Thor can take out all the elves. I think we all know what happens from here. Thor saves the day with some help from Jane. They teleport Malekith's arms to separate locations, and then they teleport his body to another location. And then the ship falls through the same portal and lands on an armless Malekith body, which was pretty satisfying, actually. That's not the end of the movie, though. Thor's got to meet up with Odin. He's got unfinished business, right? He committed treason or whatever. And Odin's going to tell Thor, hey, you once said that I was the wisest king, but you've just proven that you'd be wiser, so you should be king now. And Thor's like, nah, I don't want it. He wants to go back to Jane. And as he leaves, we see that Loki isn't actually dead. He's pretending to be Odin. Of course, then it's like, well, what happened to Odin? But I suppose we'll find that out in another installment of Thor. But that's where the movie ends. But it's not the last scene because it's Marvel. We've got a mid-credit scene and a post-credit scene. In the mid-credit scene, we see Sif and Volstagg meeting with the Collector to have him take the Aether. Why? Because they already have the Tesseract, and it's not a good idea to have 2 Infinity Stones in the same place. So we get our first reference to the Infinity Stones, which was kind of exciting to go back to. Also, did they vet the Collector at all? I mean, basically right after they leave, he's like, all right, I'm trying to get all the Infinity Stones. So that's probably not good, right? As for our post-credit scene, that's just Thor coming back to be with Jane, which is nice. But that's all. Let's find out how it ranked.
Oh, wait.
So the rank is where I rank the movie based on 10 categories: story, acting, originality, action sequences, film coherence, hero appeal, villain appeal / hatred, supporting characters appeal, the final showdown, and my rank. I rank it on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. And before I dive into the rankings here, I just want to say, if you're enjoying this episode, please leave a like down below. It really does help us out. But the first category is story. And the story is that there's creatures that were around before matter existed. Well, they say light, but Anyway, they're back. They're going to turn the universe to darkness. The vastness of the universe makes us feel like a little bit of a daunting task. It's a little convoluted, but it's serviceable. I gave it a 3.25. So let's go to acting. I think the acting in this one is actually really solid. The premise is silly and there's a lot of incongruity, but at no point was I like, geez, that's some bad acting. I couldn't actually even really think of anything to fault. Maybe Ian was a little too silly, but I don't think that was acting as much as it is character writing. So this may sound silly, but I gave it a 5. So that brings us to originality. It leans a little bit on the previous movie and Avengers, but not in a huge way. It's tough because it's just sort of a typical superhero movie, but I did enjoy exploring Asgard some more. Either way, I had to give it a 1.75. So let's go to action sequences. So at times it was a little too reliant on CGI, but there were definitely highlights. I especially thought Rene Russo's fight scene was badass. They always do a good job with choreography and they choose actors that can really utilize their physicality. And if they do hire actors that don't have great physicality, they just give them powers so that it still looks good. So I gave it a 4. So let's go to film coherence. Look, I get that the Aether is super powerful and everything, but we're really supposed to believe that it's going to extinguish the light of the entire universe? Maybe they were just hoping for the 9 realms. But why did they want to do this in the first place? They just really didn't like light? Because I mean, at no point did they say that light harms them or that they can't survive in light. Also, I don't really understand how Loki survived. But he's a trickster, so that's fine. Whatever. I'm willing to let that one go. And the way they pulled things together for the plot was just way too convenient. Like Jane getting a call while she's on another world. Like, I assume this is an entire planet they're on, and they just happen to be at the exact right spot for this. And why did the cursed Dark Elf have to infiltrate the Asgard prison system? There's just so many things here that don't really make much sense. And even though I really actually enjoyed the movie, I had to give this a 1.5. So let's go to hero appeal. So I happen to really like Thor. I think even in this one where it's more maligned, he's a super charismatic character that you can't help but root for. So I gave him a 4.5. So that brings us to villain appeal / hatred. And let's be real, Malekith is kind of blah, right? Still though, I did think he was powerful and formidable. The problem I think inherent in this is that his motivation is too ill-formed. Like he just wants the universe to be dark. That's it. I think it would have been good to have like 5 to 10 more minutes with him, getting to know his character, but we didn't get that. So I gave it a 2.5. So let's go to supporting characters appeal. I really enjoy the supporting characters in the Thor films. Eric Selvig is fun. It was a little goofy that they made him go crazy, but it worked out. I enjoyed Ian. I feel like most people probably didn't, but I liked him. Even Richard, the Chris O'Dowd character, was a lot of fun. There wasn't really anybody on the screen that I didn't enjoy seeing. I think the Dark Elves didn't really get enough time to shine, especially the cursed guy. I never really cared about him other than that he was some kind of Hulk, but I gave this a 4.5. So that brings us to the final showdown, and the final showdown is good. It lasted a long time, but I was engaged throughout. The gravity and teleportation stuff gave a different element to this. I found Malekith's eventual loss to be satisfying, but it didn't really have the full oomph of a great showdown. Maybe it's because Malekith and Thor didn't really fight at the end? Whatever it was, I gave it a 3.75. So that brings us to my rank. So I think I can acknowledge that this movie wasn't maybe put together all that well, but I still enjoyed it. I allowed myself to get lost in the idea of Dark Elves and the magical reality of Asgard and all that. That being said, it does have some failings, and there were times when I was like, but why? Still, though, I found myself entertained throughout, and I gave it a 3.85. So that puts the total for Thor: The Dark World at a 34.6, which puts it in the tier meh B+. mediocre. It ended up just below Blade Runner 2049 and just above The Fast and the Furious. And if you're ranking along with me, drop your rankings in the comments. I'd be curious to see where we're the same and where we're different. But thanks for listening and or watching. Check out my other action movie rankings or my sitcom and other movie rankings. Remember to subscribe, comment, and like. You can see full rankings at my website at therankpodcast.com. And you can email me at john@therankpodcast.com as well. If you really want to be a supporter, you can become a patron at patreon.com/therankpodcast. But that's it. So, ma el salama. So Heimdall isn't able to see her, so that's that.
Cut!
So Heimdall isn't able to see her, so that's the sets Thor.
Cut!
Okay.
He does this from time to time.